Jesse Jackson in South Africa.
There'll be a day not long from now where there'll be a South Africa where whites will lose their false fears and blacks will not be oppressed, and black and white, like lions and lambs, will lie down together, and neither will be afraid, and there'll be peace in the valley. Amanla.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories. The Mandela release fallout. Celebrations continue internationally as the ANC leader remains a focus of world attention.
When you look at Nelson, I think anybody anywhere in the world sees someone come out of 27 years and what he has gone through and still survive that and come out with a spirit so strong. I think it's a message for all people.
As press restrictions are lifted, we interview South Africa's best-known alternative journalist. He's been unable to speak out until now. Zwelhake Sisulu, a South Africa Now exclusive.
Media is going to be central, I think, in this process of transformation.
And in our culture segment, an Afrikaner breaks ranks. Meet Rian Milan, a defector from one of South Africa's first families and the author of My Traitors Heart.
What do you say about a country where white children squeal and laugh while their father tortures a black man to death in the course of a backyard barbecue?
All of these stories and more this week on South Africa Now.
You're watching South Africa Now.
But first, uncensored news with Fana, Kekana and Carolyn Craven.
Dumelang. Phillip Tomlinson is sitting in for Carolyn Craven, who is on assignment. Reaction to Mandela's release continues. President F.W. de Klerk has accepted an invitation from some African leaders to discuss his announced reforms in a meeting in Zaire on February 24th. In Lusaka, Zambia, the African National Congress has announced that it will send a delegation from its headquarters to South Africa to explore negotiations with the government. Inside South Africa, while Conservative Party supporters and neo-Nazis marched to denounce the government's new policies, Nelson Mandela has been seeking to defuse white fears.
If we demand one person, one vote, that means a change in the monopoly of political power bywards. But we wanted to do this as smoothly as possible because whites in this country are a very important section of the community. And without them, without their cooperation, we will have immense problems in this country. And that is why we are so keen to ensure, to give them guarantees that the changes we are demanding are not going to mean domination of whites by blacks. We just are not thinking in terms of color.
Celebrations overseas continue. We have this report.
Over 2,000 people crowded into the New York Riverside church to celebrate Mandela's release and reaffirm their continued support of the fight against apartheid. South African musicians now in exile brought their music to the New York celebration. Among them, Hugh Masekela, Sathima Bea Benjamin, and Abdullah Ibrahim.
The struggle is inexorably tied into all people all over the world. I think when people see Mandela, not just as a liberator of South Africa, but it's the liberation of the self, no? The liberation of the self and proof that the human spirit, the indomitable human spirit cannot be crushed.
Hugh Masekela performing here said it was not the South African government that deserves credit for Mandela's freedom.
After all the damage, that this government has done, they actually expect us reward them, or to be grateful to them for wrongly imprisoning a person and then letting him out.
Keynote speaker Patrick Terra Lekota, a leader of the United Democratic Front, told the crowd what he thinks will happen next. He outlined a scenario which emphasizes more non-violent protest.
Well, internally, I think that we will see a tapering down of armed actions, guerrilla operations. The victories of last week are now a springboard upon which we will stand in order to advance. There is more democratic space for us. We will intensify and tighten our structures. Those organizations which were scattered by the state of emergency and which were weakened by lack of organized political activity will now be revived and come back to life again.
Lekota also told us he expects the UDF will soon cease to exist under that name and will instead openly call itself the ANC.
Until now, the United Democratic Front has been like the big name inside the country. But the African National Congress now returns to our national life. And really, the ANC must take its rightful place at the head of affairs inside the country now.
With Mandela's release, a new resolution to intensify the struggle has emerged among anti-apartheid movements worldwide. The message is clear. The struggle is far from over. For South Africa Now, this is Emily Kasriel reporting.
One of the most moving gestures of support for Mandela came from a group of auto workers who demanded that the local Mercedes Benz factory build a red Mercedes for Mandela and give it to him as a gift to show the pride and esteem in which he is held. Mandela seems to have given many news reporters a gift in the form of interviews and exclusives. The press attention he's received is beginning to wane, and the editor of one of South Africa's weekly newspapers says he expects it may disappear altogether.
The fact that apartheid still may be very much in existence, the fact that Mandela may have to go to segregated hospitals and his children to segregated schools, those kinds of issues may very well be forgotten 2 weeks after his release, when all you foreigners have packed your bags and paid your hotel bills and disappeared over the horizon.
With the partial lifting of media restrictions, the ongoing war between the state and the alternative media has entered a new phase. Perhaps the leading black journalist in the country is Zwelhake Sisulu, editor of the New Nation, who, after being detained and restricted for a total of 3 years, is now free to return to work. He gave South Africa Now his first TV interview.
Obviously, it's a great relief to be back at work after 3 years of detention and restriction, and one is looking forward to making a contribution because as we should all understand, I mean, media is going to be central, I think, in this process of transformation.
The New Nation has always fought to inform the public. Throughout the 4 years of the state of emergency, the government threatened several times to close down the paper, charging it with publishing subversive propaganda.
We cease simply being carriers of information, but also actually wage struggle, just in terms of the right for people to know what is happening and for the right for us in the media to publish such information.
Gabu Tagwana was acting editor of the New Nation during Sisulu's absence.
That the media was playing a greater role in reflecting the feelings, the desires, the frustrations of the people. I'm referring here particularly to the black majority, which has no other vote. The media, particularly the alternative media, became a parliament, a people's parliament, if you like, in that that's where they felt confident that they could say whatever they wanted to say at any time without any fear of retribution.
Now back at work, Sisulu expressed concern about more subtle manipulation of the press by the government.
People in government, or people close to those in government, are leaking out certain stories. A typical example is Mandela himself. all along the media has been creating the impression that Mandela is negotiating behind the ANC's back, and that in fact there were tensions within the organization, because of that. It is only with the recent publication of what has become known as the Mandela document, stating his own position, that a lot of people in our country have now been reassured. So what I'm saying is that there is probably unavoidably this element of mischief making within the media. What we're seeing now is actually a throwback to 1948, when the nationalists took power. You had the ANC and the Communist Party operating legally. Mandela was a free man in many instances. Beaches, swimming pools, and transport, public transport in this country was integrated. The onion peel, repressive legislation of apartheid is coming out, bit by bit. But we're not interested in that. We're really interested in the core.
This is Nadja Smith for South Africa Now.
Leading industrial South African stocks and gold prices soared to new heights when FW de Klerk spelled out his initiatives in his dramatic speech before Parliament on February 2nd. But the rand took a plunge when the recently released ANC leader Nelson Mandela began talking about nationalizing mines and banks. Betty Raptopoulos of Prudential Beige Securities gives us her assessment.
And investors were beginning to think about, well, we ought to be buying gold stocks again because they had gone down sharply. Well, we ought to think about investing in South Africa. Then suddenly the word nationalization pops up. It's part of an entire speech, but nationalization is terrifying to investors because it means the government may take over their money or their investment or whatever.
One of the issues that President de Klerk has yet to address concerns laws considered to be the pillars of the apartheid system, like the Group Areas Act, which mandates where blacks can and cannot live. In Johannesburg, one family is personally challenging the law. Carolyn Craven reports.
This is not the story of well-known or imprisoned leaders, but a story about the people on this street. For 1 week, they were evicted from their homes. This report tells a lot about the ongoing daily reality of being black in South Africa. Living in an area of Johannesburg designated for whites, the residents of this building were forced from their homes. The reason? Families refused to pay the landlord almost 3 times the rent a white resident would pay to stay there. The landlord refused comment, but we did speak with activists working on behalf of the tenants.
The landlord is saying that people are not supposed to be here under the Group Area Act, and then so they are hiding us in these buildings. We don't have to complain, and then what they're doing, they charge us more than we should have been paying, because what they understand is, according to Group Area Act, we're not supposed to be here. Then we can't have any way to complain.
But this action violates South Africa's Rent Act, which prohibits the arbitrary increase of rent of any South African citizen, regardless of race.
What the Rent Act says is the building is rent controlled and the rent is supposed to be so much. Doesn't state when blacks are staying in or whites are staying in. It's just the Act says everybody who will stay in that building will pay that amount. Then what we're saying is, since we are the citizen of this country, we are also subjected to the protection of the same Act.
ACTSTOP, or Action to Stop Evictions, comes to the aid of families like these. And in this case, they were victorious, negotiating an equitable settlement with the landlord. Now the families are back in their apartments. But this is one issue that won't go away. South Africa faces a serious housing shortage, inadequate facilities in the townships, and the black majority, determined to live where it pleases, is fighting housing restriction.
Heavy fighting has been reported in Angola, and the peace process started last year between the MPLA government and the US-backed UNITA movement appears to have completely broken down. Here's our report. The battles have been concentrated in the south of the country, around the strategic town of Mavinga, after the government accused UNITA of ceasefire violations. Recently, Angola's ambassador to the United Nations held a press conference where he announced that government forces had retaken the town.
Mavinga encontra-se de facto sob o controle das nossas forças.
Mavinga is in fact under the control of our forces.
He also reaffirmed his government's commitment to negotiating with UNITA leader Jonas Savimbi, offering amnesty and fair treatment to all its members.
Tratamento humanitário a Savimbi.
That's the humanitarian or humane treatment.
E isso é muito importante.
And that's very important.
Esta é uma novidade.
This is something new.
É uma nova mensagem de paz.
It constitutes a new peace message.
De amizade.
A message of friendship.
E de cooperação.
And a message of cooperation.
Não só para os elementos.
UNITA, on the other hand, charges the government with starting the latest offensive and questions their commitment to peace.
The whole offensive is senseless at this point. At the time when everybody was talking of peace, we were all putting our hopes on a negotiated solution. It is senseless to launch a war of such scale. So this is actually an indication that the MPLA is not willing to talk, and an indication that they are still pursuing war instead of peace.
The latest fighting comes at a critical time. With the independence of Namibia just around the corner, continued South African support as well as future United States assistance for UNITA is in question. Political analyst William Minter comments.
What is going to happen now that this large-scale South African support is not possible with Namibia approaching independence? The U.S. CIA can, fly in supplies, but that's not the same. It's not as cheap as South Africa trucking in supplies and soldiers and artillery, just over the border. That can't be done anymore. So what's going to happen now is, with that changed situation, is one of the crucial questions for this year.
We'll continue to bring you the latest on the Angolan conflict. Meanwhile, in Namibia, a new historical phase is about to start. Joseph Diescho reports.
I'm Joseph Diescho with Namibia Watch. It's official. The Constitution has been ratified and the date for independence is March 21st. Sam Nujoma, the leader of the Southwest Africa People's Organization, has been named president of the soon-to-be independent country of Namibia. It's been a long and bitter road through years of exile and armed struggle. Sam Nujoma had told South Africa Now about this long journey.
It's been a long time, but we have had conviction and believe that we are fighting for a just cause and we are about to win. So it is for this reason I say now we can see the green light at the end of the tunnel. Yet there are some obstacles to be uprooted. But after we fought for the last 22 years, SWAPO have created confidence in the masses of the Namibian people that they are self-liberators.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
When Nelson Mandela returned triumphantly to Soweto, he lectured young people to return to school. A number of observers have spoken of the generational conflict between the older leadership of the ANC and the so-called Young Lions, the militant township youth. For one perspective, we turned to Peter Mokaba, an activist and leader of the South African Youth Organization.
Most recent images coming from South Africa focus on Mandela and his generation, the people who came to politics in the 40s and 50s. But young people in South Africa are energizing the movement. These are the kids they call the Young Lions, known for their battles with police and their militant marches. They have their own leaders too, young people who have also done hard time in prison and detention. Peter Mokaba is president of SAICO, the South African Youth Congress. He says the youths have been inspired by the older generation, men like Mandela.
I mean, the majority of the youth that are in SAICO today do not know Nelson, but each and every song that they sing is about that comrade. See, it is in their culture, it is in their politics, social life, it is in the games that they play, it is in their bloodstream, and it is also in my bloodstream.
Here, SAICO General Secretary Rapu Malekani projects SAICO's organizing process at a recent rally in Cape Town.
And you see that apartheid is dying. And
told us his movement has had to work clandestinely.
We are a mass legal organization. We are supposed to be legal in terms of apartheid law, but we've been suppressed by the same law. So that we have adopted elements of underground organization.
When you talk about Peter Mugabe, you're talking about the Freedom Charter, you're talking about SWAPO, you're talking about the ANC, you're talking about my people.
Malekani says SWAPO, like the ANC, survives because of its deep roots in the community.
The level of organization is different from the organizations that existed in the past, in that you have more conscious youth, more politicized youth, who know exactly what their tasks are and who has been tampered with, in trenches of battle. So that now the commitment of the youth is much, much higher than ever before.
And newspapers in South Africa are calling Mokaba a man to watch, one of the emerging leaders of the 90s.
We don't believe that it is the individuals who make history. We believe that it is the masses. Whatever I'm doing here in the struggle, I'm doing it as part and parcel of SWAPO. And if it was not because of SWAPO, the Sunday Times wouldn't have known about Peter Mugabe. The vision that I have is the one that my people, that forms the life experience of my people. And that is why my people will recognize themselves in what I say.
For South Africa Now, this is Phillip Tomlinson reporting.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
With de Klerk's initiative, South Africa's white Afrikaners have a new yet untested image as a people willing to consider basic changes. In this week's cultural segment, you'll meet an Afrikaner who comes from one of South Africa's first white families. His name is Rian Malan, author of a newly published book that's getting a lot of attention.
My name is Rian Malan. I'm a descendant of a guy called Jacques Malan who went to Africa in 1688. In the years since then, in the 3 centuries since then, Malan has been present at every drama and turning points in the Afrikaner tribe. I guess most recently, the first Afrikaner nationalist Prime Minister of South Africa and the architect of apartheid, Daniel Francois Malan, was a grand uncle of mine.
Rian Malan is a crime reporter and the author of the new book, My Traitors Heart, a cry from the anguished conscience of an Afrikaner who has broken with the conventions of his tribe.
My father was a man who believed apartheid has to work. We have no other choice. The alternative to apartheid would be chaos. I rebelled against Afrikanerdom and against everything that my father would have wanted me to be.
Malan's book describes his flight from South Africa to avoid military service.
Essentially that I ran away from South Africa because I was afraid. I was afraid of the coming changes and I was afraid of the consequence of not changing. We all knew that there was going to be a convulsion in South Africa's future and I didn't know which side I was on, and consequently rather than stay there and find out, I ran away. It was the easy thing to do and I've always felt that it diminished me.
The uprising in the townships in 1985 compelled Malan to return and coldly examine his fears.
The book was a catharsis for me. I wrote it to make peace with myself. In its most simple level, it's a collection of murder stories of various forms of South African extremism.
For him, the study of murders, both black and white, revealed the chilling complexity of the nation's psyche.
Who do you want to kill?
We are the baddies. You. Like you. Like you.
Like me?
Like you. Yes.
Wow.
Like you.
I'm a nice chap.
No, you got a gun in your pocket.
It's not a gun.
You never know. That thing that you're holding, it could have an automatic machine gun inside it.
What do you say about a country where white children squeal and laugh while their father tortures a black man to death in the course of a backyard barbecue? And what, on the other hand, do you say about crowds of black children who sing and dance while somebody is being burnt in their midst? I mean, there seem to me so many levels of horror at work in South Africa. But the only way that I could come to terms with them or even look at them was by following this trail of blood.
This is the climate in which FW de Klerk announced his reforms. But Malan has serious doubts about the president's commitment to change.
The de Klerk administration is prepared to share power with blacks on whatever basis is comfortable to themselves, provided that ultimate power remains in white people's hands. And I suppose, look, I'd love to say that it was a step in the right direction, and I suppose it is, but it doesn't solve anything in South Africa. The basic cause of violence and so forth in South Africa, and the misery, is the denial of rights, of full rights to black South Africans. And so anything that stops short of that is going to perpetuate the existing instability, and it is not a solution. What we have to do is we have to come to terms with our position in Africa, and we have to find some way of trusting Africa and give ourselves into the arms of the great African mother, trusting she won't drop us. The alternative is too ghastly to contemplate, and there is no alternative.
But Malan is returning to promote change.
Ultimately, I believe in the tyranny of the ballot box. I'd like to see my country become a truly African, a truly democratic country, and that's what I'm going back to South Africa to work for.
That's our program this week. We are grateful to our viewers who continue to respond to our financial crisis. For more information on the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund, a tax-exempt organization providing assistance and relief to victims of apartheid. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of everyone at South Africa Now, I'm Fana Kekana. See you next week.
Nelson Mandela, Free at Last, a South Africa Now PBS special, is available on home video for $14.95. Send check or money order to South Africa Now, 361 West Broadway, New York, New York 10013.
Move underground, WMK. Move underground, move underground, WMK. Move underground.
South Africa Now is also supported by public television viewers like you.